For the owners, can everyone hear me? There. For the owners standing in the back, the members, you can certainly come forward. There's some seats in the front couple rows or in the middle if you would like to sit down. So I'm going to talk about the do's and don'ts of effective meetings. So the topics that I plan on covering today are the role of the parliamentarian, some general issues that we've seen related to meetings, how to handle difficult meetings, knowing the warning signs that a battle is up ahead, and how to prepare for a difficult meeting. And if you can hold any questions that you have for the presenters until the Q&A session after all the presentations have been heard, that would be greatly appreciated. So the role of the parliamentarian. So of course the worst way to start any presentation is to give a definition of what you're teaching about. So that is the way that we're going to start it today. So the first definition on dictionary.com states that a parliamentarian is a person who is expert in the formal rules and procedures of deliberative assemblies and other formal organizations. So it's a fancy way to say a meeting expert. So it's what parliamentarians do. They're experts at meetings and how to run meetings properly. The original role of the parliamentarian was to advise the presiding officer or the president about meeting procedures and how to serve the organization itself. That role has kind of evolved over time. And so now we have a couple different ideas behind it. One of the ways that it's evolved is to be a sword or a floor parliamentarian. So in that, you're representing a client from the audience of the meeting, making sure that, as we're talking about here, condominium owners, making sure that you as a condominium owner, that your rights are preserved by the board of directors who's running everything. Some people see us as a shield. We protect the often unpaid board members, as you heard Carol refer to, from angry members. Sometimes having the parliamentarian run the meeting, to be the professional presiding officer, is a good way to avoid the president getting yelled at, when the president doesn't always deserve it. They do sometimes, but not always. It helps to keep the meeting civil because it will require members to address the chair rather than those who are angry, they're actually angry at. So I always remind people, direct your remarks to the chair. I know you're mad at this board member, but talk to the chair. Some see us as a peacemaker. Because when we preside, we're neutral. I don't care if you remove your bike rack. I don't care if you fill your pool with cement, as long as you do it following the rules. That's what I'm there for. So I don't have opinions on what you choose or not choose to do, as long as you're following the rules. So sometimes it is easier to have a parliamentarian or a neutral party to run your meeting. Sometimes we're also able to bring the different factions together to find a compromise to work between everyone. Lastly, sometimes we can be viewed as a pacemaker. Keep the heart of the organization going, make sure the board members don't have heart attacks over the stress that they have to face. Parliamentarians are sometimes called upon to provide opinions on governing documents and meeting procedures. And sometimes we'll propose amendments to governing documents to improve the efficiency of your organization and the efficiency of its meetings. Generally, we're called upon to serve at meetings. Usually it's owners' meetings, like the annual meeting, or if you have a special meeting for a certain purpose. Very occasionally, we'll attend board meetings. Sometimes we just attend the board meeting once or twice to kind of show everyone how the board meeting should be. Like Carol said, this is a business. It's a corporation, and it needs to be run as such, which means that the board members want you to have your rights be heard as owners. They want you to have the opportunity to speak, but they also need to get all the business done. They need to pay all the bills. They need to approve the painting and all sorts of other things that maintain the building or the community association in which you live. So some general issues that relate to meetings. Are meetings properly called? So was the notice done properly? The worst thing is to get a call about a meeting in April, and the bylaws say that the meeting is supposed to be on the second Tuesday in March. So make sure that your meetings are properly called. I noticed that most of you raised your hands when you were asked if you're board members, which means that you as board members, you should at least have read through the bylaws once or twice. Admittedly, the declaration is sometimes very long. So I can completely understand if you maybe haven't read through every single word of the declaration. I have seen ones with like 20 different amendments. So I understand how difficult that can be. The important parts to read are the parts that govern the use of your specific space, either your apartment unit or your house in the community association association, you definitely want to read those portions of the declaration. And I suggest reading most of the bylaws, because the bylaws, again, talk about duties and rights. It's very important that you know those things. If there's a special meeting to be called, there needs to be an authority that calls it. Is it the president? Is it the board? Is it a petition signed by 10% of owners? That needs to be specified. In order to take action at a meeting, you need a minimum number of people present, and that's what the definition of quorum is. So we throw this word around, a lot of people don't quite understand what it means, and really what it means is it's the minimum number of people that you need to be there or be represented there in order to take real action of the group. It may not be specified in your bylaws. Some bylaws are silent, especially with older organizations, and if it's not, it's generally a majority of your membership. Meetings without a quorum, there are a couple things that you can do, but you don't want to take any substantive action there, because unless you can get it ratified later, there's a danger in taking any real action without a quorum. If possible, make sure your property manager, your board, that they ensure a quorum coming into any sort of owners' meetings. It definitely saves on expenses of repeated mailings or continuing that meeting to another date. Then you're going to have to pay for the venue, you're going to have to pay for any professionals who have to be there. So it's very important to try to ensure a quorum coming in. Keep in mind, if you don't have a quorum, sometimes boards are like, oh great, we don't have to have a meeting, let's just adjourn. Which is great, I love short meetings. Yeah, great, 5 minutes, I'm out. Awesome. However, they have to realize that that means the next year, there's more board positions up for election. If you have a 5-member board, and this year there were 2 positions up, no big deal. Okay, we didn't have a quorum, we adjourned the meeting. We come back next year, guess what? All 5 positions are up. So if someone is done, if you have a troublemaker owner, and they've collected proxies, they could take over the entire board, because you have all seats up for election. So it's a couple things to think about. So you balance that with the cost of continuing the meeting. What's cheaper? Getting a quorum coming in. In another presentation, one of the property managers discussed different ways of ensuring that people return their proxies. I like nicer ways, maybe encourage them with some sort of raffle. Hey, if you turn in your proxy by the deadline, we will pick 5 owners, and those 5 owners will get gift cards. They'll get, $25 gift cards to Ross's or wherever. But that way it's a little incentive for people to return their proxy on time. And paying for those gift cards, a lot cheaper than paying for another meeting. Bylaws do have requirements for certain meetings, such as annual meetings. Most often, you have to have your election at the annual meeting. Sometimes there will be weird little requirements about the board appointing nominating committees or tellers committees, so you got to pay attention to those things. Most condominiums that I serve, and even community associations, it's required to have a board organizational meeting. Usually they require it to happen immediately after the annual meeting. Sometimes they'll say within 10 days, sometimes they'll say as scheduled by the owners or directors present, but most often the easiest way to do it is after the annual meeting. A board organizational meeting is where the directors meet to elect their officers for the coming year, because owners generally elect directors to the board, and the board of directors itself elects its own officers to serve. Regarding reports, so nothing can make a meeting go longer than long reports. Sometimes they can be really helpful, and we definitely want to be as transparent as we can to the ownership, because the number one reason why a parliamentarian is called, in my experience, is because the board hasn't been transparent enough. Only once or twice the board was too transparent, especially on a personnel issue, and you got to be careful there. So usually be as transparent as you can to the ownership. That doesn't mean you have to give long reports, okay? You can also provide reports in writing, which is fantastic. Technically, the group that elects the office, they're the group that hears the report. So board members are elected by the owners, so board members report to the owners. However, a board committee, like the roads committee, if it's a community association, or a condo could be a landscaping committee or something similar, that committee, if it's created by the board, that means they report to the board. So you can provide that information to owners. You don't have to, but you can. Keep in mind, though, those reports should be heard at board meetings. Board committees report at board meetings. Anything to do with owners, then you report at the owners' meetings. A property manager is not an officer of the association, so therefore they really have no right to report at an annual meeting. You can certainly ask permission to allow them to report, or they can write a report. Same thing for resident managers, but there's no right there, because they report where? The board meeting. The board is who hires them. If an organization is incorporated, keep in mind that there is a little part of the state law 414D that does say that the president and or financial officer may be required to report. So keep that in mind at your meetings, that if your president is not reporting and maybe you don't have any sort of financials from the auditor, you may want to elbow your president to saying a few words. That way you are complying. Again, this only applies to incorporated associations. Before the meeting, make sure there are enough ballots. That has happened. I've been to many meetings where the property manager will just bring the election ballot, and I'm like, well, what if we have another motion? What if the election doesn't elect all the seats that are open and we need to do a second election? So definitely always have more than one ballot available for the meeting, that's for sure. So as board members, make sure that your property manager is doing their due diligence on that. If your bylaws say that you need to elect your board members by ballot, then you need to elect your board members by ballot. That means even if you have 3 people for 3 positions, what do you still have to do? Elect them by ballot, because that's what the rules require. The reason that Roberts requires that is it gives you the right to write in a name. So when you take away that secret ballot right from someone, you're taking away their ability to write in the name of someone they wish to elect. Some bylaws, especially with organizations we've worked with a long time trying to amend their governing documents, some bylaws will allow owners to waive the secret ballot if there's no contest. That way, if everyone's happy, great. Waive the secret ballot, have a nice 5-minute meeting, fantastic. But if there is no waiver in the bylaws, you must do secret ballot. There's no argument for not doing it. As far as the minutes are concerned, they need to be an accurate record of what was done at the meeting, not necessarily what was said. You know, we don't care about the different comments from everyone. What we care is if someone said, I move. Did they make a motion for action at the meeting? That's what absolutely needs to be in the minutes for the most part. So the easiest way to cut down on arguing over names, oh, I didn't say that. That isn't what I meant to say. Take out names. Right? Take out names and take out discussion, because that shouldn't be in there anyway. State law requires community associations and condominium associations to follow Robert's rules, and Robert's rules say that minutes contain action. So that's what needs to be in the minutes, action. Less is more. I've seen litigation over minutes being too wordy. I've never seen litigation over minutes not being wordy. So for difficult meetings, what makes a meeting difficult? Well, if you see a parliamentarian there, that might be a clue that you're in for a difficult meeting. Okay, so usually it's where one or more unusual issues are expected to be presented, and it may require the services of one or more hired professionals. Sometimes you'll see attorney and parliamentarian both there. Sometimes you'll even see the auditor there. If there are some issues with the audit, they want to answer questions, etc. There are over 1,700 condominiums in many community associations, but the majority of the meetings are conducted in an orderly manner without outside professional assistance. It's the exceptions that provide why we need this assistance sometimes. Some groups that I serve are really peaceful now, but they remember when it wasn't peaceful. And so basically we are now the guard to keeping the peace. You know, that's what we've become. Which is great, because then we focus on making the meeting more efficient, making everyone happy as much as possible. In newer organizations, you might see some developer issues. So sometimes when I'm going to the first couple meetings of a new condo, we'll hear complaints about developers not being transparent enough, them shirking their duties on making sure that certain amenities are there, etc. You'll see that. Then you know that meeting could be difficult. There's often confusion, as you heard Carol say, over what the board has the authority to do and what the owners have the authority to do. So a lot of people, and I understand why people think it, because we live in America and it's awesome. And it's a democracy and we all have a voice, we can speak, we can vote, we can affect the outcome of things. So a condominium association or a community association is a little bit different. It's more like a stock corporation. So as much as we like to, reflect the democratic ideals, we like to receive input, it's much different than that kind of idea. So most governing documents that I've read, they give boards all the authority to manage the business of the association, except for things that are specifically reserved for owners. So that's pretty specific. So the things that are reserved for owners are usually, putting people on the board, kicking people off the board, and amending the governing documents. Those are the 3 things that I pretty much always see that owners have the right to do. If nothing else is spelled out, then usually the owners can't really do very much else. I tell owners, you can't tell your board what to do. If you don't like what they're doing, you can remove them. Or you can nominate your own candidates and try to get them to win the election, but you can't tell your board what to do. So a lot of people don't understand the balance between owners and board members.